strength and our hope. Amen. There are Bible stories you ought to know simply because they're about how we live together, as was ably demonstrated in the Learning Together. Thank you. It feels like there should be more. Doesn't it, a little bit? Yeah, there is a little bit more. So there are stories that we need to know, not just because, of course, the content of the story itself, or indeed the very words of the story itself, but the story that's around that and the context in which that little piece, that little nugget that we just heard, is told. And the context of the Ten Commandments is that people who didn't know how to live together needed some direction on how to live together. They were broken as a community. They'd lived in an environment where somebody literally told them what to do every single moment of the day. And now they were free. It's gotten kind of tricky using the word freedom lately. But here, what we mean is they simply did not know how to be free and how to live with each other, to live with the world around them. And so whether it happened exactly the way it did for Charlton Heston in the movie, the flaming finger of God writing in the stone, or whether Moses chipped them out of the stone himself, or indeed whether, in fact, the story happened that way. I don't know. I wasn't there. But what we got was 10 really important sayings about how we could begin to live together when our community is broken. I think that'd be really helpful now. It is, because that's what they're about. Now, we call them 10 Commandments because the Geneva Bible called them commandments in the 16th century. Then the King James Version called them commandments, and it stuck. Jews don't call them commandments. They're sayings. They're words. You see how the different terminology there might lead us to suspect that they are something that they're not. Whenever we use words like commandment, usually followed by obey, we tend to focus on the power that is being exercised there, not the point of the commandment itself, saying itself. And that's one of the trickiest things about things like this in the Bible. In fact, like the Bible itself, is are we understanding it as a way for us together to accomplish something, or are we understanding it as someone told us its power and we shall behave? There was a really great movie a few years ago called The Book of Eli. I don't know if anybody saw it. If you did, I'm suspicious of you immediately. It was an extremely violent film. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. If you didn't see it, I'm not recommending it for you. It's just a really good film. But it had really interesting, and spoiler alert, if you do plan on watching it, I'm about to tell you what happens. In a very dark and post-apocalyptic future, there's a guy who feels called to carry a book to a particular place, and that book happens to be the Bible. His name's Eli, and on his journey, he encounters a local warlord who's figured out how to control people. Can you guess how? The Bible. He figures that if he wields the book and can tell people what's in it, and they'll obey him, but he would have even more power if he actually had one in his hand. And there aren't any, because they were all destroyed, except for this one copy. And then lo and behold, here's Eli with the copy of the book. So the warlord tries to get it from him. Violence and mayhem ensues. In the end, he has to give up the book in order to escape. I think he actually gives it up in order to save somebody else, but the warlord ends up with the book, is the point. But Eli gets away, and he ends up getting to his destination. Here's the quirky part about this. Turns out Eli's blind, and the Bible is in Braille. So the warlord can't read it. But Eli has memorized it. And so when he gets to his destination, he recites it, it's recorded by somebody else, and made into a book again. There's a metaphor for you. He knew it by heart, right? The point, though, that it's really relevant here is that the idea that the warlord could use the Bible as a weapon to control people, to have power over them. And when we use language like commandments, sometimes that leads us down that path of power over in order that you will behave. And the thing about the 10 sayings is that they're anything but that. Anything but that. They're about how we would live together as a community. And that's who they were intended for, people who didn't know how to do that. And so here's a way to do that. And it begins with our relationship with God. So if you understand God in the traditional religious sense, okay, but let's just expand that a little bit and consider a few things. In the beginning, the Spirit of God created, right? So God is essentially the Spirit of life. God is the source of life. And in creating all things were created good, including you and I, by the way. That's your factory setting. And love. Right? So all things that give life, the source of life, all things that give life. Love, kindness, grace, compassion. All of those great things, justice, respect, all of those things that give life, that are life-giving, those are God. So the beginning of these sayings begins with our relationship with God, with our relationship with the source of life, in order that we might understand life. And then gets into some fairly specific things. There's a lot of thou shalt nots, which is, I've always found particularly interesting. It's like we seem to understand the negative much better than the positive. But think about it for a second. Even as you progress through all of these things, you get things like thou shalt not murder. Oh, King James moment, sorry. Don't murder or kill. We've had a big debate about, which it is and whether or not there's a way to get around that because, we like killing. And okay, I don't want to debate that today, but if you take that very negative, thou shalt not do that, what's the positive side of that? You will love life and honor life, respect life. The whole thing is about how we live together and how we honor each other and how we honor life. Respect, justice, honor, those are the things that are there. It's about how we live together. Which kind of begs the question for me, and I've been thinking about this last week, especially on Wednesday. Why isn't there one that says, thou shalt not hate? Now, I happened to mention this to somebody earlier in the week. Why isn't there one that says, thou shalt not hate? And they said, I thought there was. And sorry to tell you this, but there isn't one of the 10 commandments that specifically says, thou shalt not hate. Oh, I just thought there was. Well, of course you would, because if you understood the 10 commandments as being about life and love and grace and compassion, all those good things that are life-giving, hate's not on that list. However, we don't necessarily, because we somehow happen to be really good at hate But it is there, right? Because if the whole thing is essentially about how we relate to each other, how we create a life-giving, living relationship with each other, how we create community with each other, it's definitely there. Because hate don't do that. Hate is destructive. Hate breaks things like relationships and people. It hurts things. It doesn't offer grace and compassion. It doesn't offer love. It doesn't offer anything except control and power. And even then, it's not taking you anywhere. Hate is destructive to the self, too. These sayings are about love. They're about relationship. They're about how we live in community. Now, it could also be, you might be thinking to yourself, well, then why, it wouldn't have been that hard for there to be 11, right? I mean, I know 10's a nice round number, but 11, you know. And by the way, I have a few more. Yeah, sure. And it could be like, if you saw the Facebook post about today, you know where I'm about to go. Mel Brooks famously did a skit in his movie History of the World where he's Moses and he's coming down with the 3 tablets and he says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord has given you these 15," and he drops one. 10 commandments. I do not have an answer for why there's 10. I don't. It's a nice number. It's a nice round number. It would fit on 2 tablets maybe. I don't know. But the thing is, you can't just go, well, these are the 10. And in fact, the people didn't do that. They wrote an entire book of laws. But the point is, those 10 aren't the only 10. And they are not just 10. They are, in fact, 1. Jesus is going to talk about it later. The greatest commandment is love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And you can't love yourself unless you love God. You can't love God unless you love your neighbor. You can't love your neighbor unless you love yourself. You need all 3 of those. They're connected. Just like all 10 of those are connected. And what connects them is God. Understanding God as source of life and love, the source of all that is good from the beginning. So rather than commands about behavior, rather than laws that simply control, what if we try to understand those things as just simply ways that we live better together? We live in a system of I'm reluctant to call it justice, I was just about to, but we live in a system of laws, and laws aren't always about justice, nor are they always about how we live together and creating relationship. They are sometimes simply about control. And as long as we understand them that way, we're not building any relationships, are we? So go back to this understanding that these things are there for a reason, that they're connected for a reason. Life and how we live together. In order for us to live in relationship. And once again, I'd just like to thank the kids earlier for pointing out how well that works when you don't have any acknowledgement of each other and or any way of deciding who's going to speak. If we want to live in community and create community, everyone needs to feel like they belong. And belonging isn't just fitting in, it isn't just following the rules. It's being part of the community and helping to create that sense of community. And we do that by understanding life, the source of life, the life-giving nature of God. of love and compassion and grace, respect, justice. I'm sure I could come up with 10 if you give me a minute. They're all there.